Good morning, everybody, and welcome to day 4 of webinar week here with Beyond Pulse. Delighted today to be joined by Theresa Beeckman and, of course, Mr. Mark Wilson, who is co-hosting this with me. Really excited for everybody that's on the line, really excited to dive into what I feel is a really pertinent topic that I heard Theresa speak about at the last USC convention. Obviously, how we coach and connect with this generation. So super excited to dive in and share in the wealth of experience that Theresa has. Theresa, before I butcher any background information, I'm going to turn that over to you a little bit to share a small introduction on obviously who you are for those that are less familiar, and a little bit of your background, and then we'll dive right in.
All right, sounds good. It's thanks so much for having me this morning, and I'm delighted to be here and with all of you who are sharing your morning with us. In our new normal, hopefully this passes through as quickly and all of you stay as healthy as possible. As Tom said, my name is Theresa Beeckman, and everybody calls me Tree. And what you should know is it's because I was a volleyball coach for about 21 years, and I'm 5'1". So I look like I should fit into the soccer world. It's a little bit more than volleyball. So it's kind of an ironic nickname. Players started it, when they were mad at me, and they'd call me like Tree Stump or Tree Shrub. But I left coaching after the 2015 season. I was at a mid-major, Division I, Central Michigan University, and my head coach, I was the associate head coach. My head coach actually got fired and removed in the middle of the season, like you're seeing at a lot of levels all over the world, really. And truly nothing happened. I mean, he just sort of failed to I don't know, kind of adapt and update the water bottle. So anyway, so I coached volleyball for 20 plus years, and since 2015, I started a consulting firm, and I kind of joined forces with a whole bunch of different entities, all of them looking to serve student athletes and serve coaches. The one that is my most favorite vehicle is Growing Leaders, and Growing Leaders is a nonprofit based out of Atlanta, Georgia. We'll get into a lot more about Growing Leaders, but basically we like to see ourselves as the bridge between the generations. And so that's, I think, what we're going to dive into today. And that's just, I guess, a little summation about where I'm coming from.
Perfect. Well, thank you for that, Tree. And again, for the value of everybody that's listening to that firsthand, I think it provides a really unique insight and perspective as to why, obviously, we were so excited to welcome you. And I really hope, guys, that are on the line now or watching on demand a little bit later. As I said, it's such a pertinent and prominent theme right now in our industry, and considering the time that we're at, the ability to connect with and inspire this generation in difficult times, I think, has got more value now than perhaps ever in recent history. So again, as always, thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your morning with us. And if and when there's questions throughout, please don't hesitate to jump in and pop a message there, and we'll try redirect attention to you guys. So, Tree, without further ado, I've started every conversation this week asking this question because it's based on inspiration, and in tough times, we want to acknowledge best practice and give a shout out to people who are doing great work, or the lessons that we can learn from people who have inspired our guests in the past. So, appreciate that. Numbers in volleyball and soccer are a little bit different, but give me your all-time all-star five-a-side team of coaches and the characteristic that they share or displayed that inspired you.
Okay, so I have 5 that I have to come up with, and all of mine, I'll be honest, aren't going to be necessarily like sport coaches. I think that coaches are teachers, and sport aside, I feel like we all coach people first. So when you ask me, even throughout my entire career, what I coached, I would say people. And yeah, I use volleyball to coach it. You guys use soccer, or football, whatever you call it. But like I just think that we all coach people. And so the first one that I would say is Miss Bounds. Dame Bounds was my 5th grade teacher. I was terrified to go to school every day. And for about the first half of the school year, I remember I would be shaking, and she would throw like erasers at you, but I still remember what photosynthesis is because of that woman. And she just was the first one that really made me embrace being uncomfortable on a daily basis. That was back in 5th grade. So that was cool. And she never cut me a break. I didn't feel any, I don't know. She just really kept me on my toes. So that would be number one. The second one would be Suzanne Brown. She was actually, ironically, I played softball at Saginaw Valley State University, which is a Division II in Michigan. And she like very loosely recruited me, Suzanne Brown did, to go to Northwood, which is Saginaw's rival. And I ended up not going there. But as a rival coach, she was a coach that inspired me, and I never played for her. I ended up getting the opportunity to work for her after college for a little bit. But she was she's one of my top 5, and she was the same, just unrelenting, just really she pushed me as a competitor, and it was pretty cool. Deb Van Kuiken was my 9th grade algebra teacher, and she was the AD who gave me a job as a softball coach right out of college. I had already coached volleyball at a rival high school, and then she hired me to coach softball at the same time at my alma mater as soon as I finished playing. And she was just somebody who always believed in me, and she walked her talk, you know. And then probably since then, I have the utmost respect and admiration, and just somebody who inspires me on a daily basis is somebody so I also serve as a director of volleyball operations at Western Michigan University. The head coach there is Colleen Munson, and my designation is volleyball operations director, but I don't live anywhere near the school. I talk to Colleen on a very regular basis, and we sort of consider each other thinking partners. And she's somebody who really pushes me on a daily basis too. So there are 4, and the other person I would say that really kind of keeps me in check and pushes me on a daily basis would be my wife. So those are my big star 5.
Cool. Amazing. It's always fascinating to hear the commonalities in characteristics, and again, the challenges that many people on the line will pose to their players, that the concept of embracing being uncomfortable, get comfortable being uncomfortable, right? You said that, can you walk your talk, right? It was a title of one of our blog posts. It's always fascinating to hear that the impact that can have, and how it resonates so deeply with people. So thank you for sharing that. Can
I jump in just quickly there? I love that you started off with your 5th grade teacher, and instead of seeing that as a negative experience, saw it as a positive. I love it. Building resilience early. Fantastic.
Thank you. It's something that I look back and I got the text from Tom this morning. I thought, well, it's got to be her. And I just never, I remember I feel very lucky that I've never looked back on those situations in a negative light. I don't know. It's just, I don't know what my mom did to make that happen, but it's something that I've always looked back on endearingly.
Fantastic.
Amazing. Well, Tree, I want to be mindful, because obviously we've got a hard deadline with you because of all the other responsibilities that you have today. So I'm going to jump straight in to obviously why we brought you on, and the topic that we want to kind of dive into, which is how to coach and better understand this generation, the new generation of children that are growing up in a world very different to the one that any of us experienced. So as you dive in here, can you provide a surface level insight into the challenges that you are seeing, and the problems that coaches might be coming to you with, that ultimately we're going to explore and investigate a little further?
Absolutely. So how I usually, when I start talks off like this, usually what I use, and you saw it, Tom, is the video from Rush Hour, where they get off the plane and he says, "Do you understand the words that are coming out of my mouth?" And of course Jackie Chan just kind of smiles at him. And I used that video, this little clip, as a way to express, like, that's how it started to feel for me. And as a coach, I've always been passionate about the people first, the players. And I noticed probably, I don't know, somewhere in the last 3 years that I was actually a sport coach, like actually on a staff coaching, that job, like connecting with players and getting them to hear the words coming out of my mouth, and and seeing where they were in terms of how prepared or their lack of preparation at the Division I level, it just turned really quickly. And so it really, what I try to do for coaches and for student athletes, and by the way, I show that video to both audiences, and both audiences resonate with that video a lot. Like, you get as much laughter and shaking their heads in the student audiences looking at that video as you do when I'm talking to coaches. So I think it's important to understand that we all sort of feel like, you know, the other person's talking a different language, or speaking a different language. And what we can do, and I'll tell you, I think that it's important to note that throughout the course of human history, people have always thought the next generation was irresponsible, and, you know, you can fill in the blanks. There was a quote from Socrates where he's talking about the next generation, and if you took the name off this quote, it would look like something we might be saying today, change the language and update it a little bit. But what is different now is that technology, the way that we're able to sit here, I'm in a parking lot outside of Panera for their Wi-Fi on my computer in a car, and I'm talking to people all over the world, right? So that's cool, but that's literally, it just changed the way that we've raised our students, and it's changed the way that they've communicated and interacted with the world. And so when I found Growing Leaders, which again it's a nonprofit, Growing Leaders, just a little bit, because most of you probably never heard of it. It's not very big. Probably started about 15 years ago, and sort of spread through word of mouth. We work with industries like business, K through 12, the athletic world. Numbers of colleges and professional teams use what we call Habitudes, which are just images that help form leadership habits and attitudes, right? And we use images for very specific reasons. So Growing Leaders was founded by Dr. Tim Elmore. If you haven't read anything by Dr. Tim Elmore, I just encourage you to go to growingleaders.com. He's got a bunch of free ebooks that are super digestible. Stressed Out is amazing and really updated with the numbers and why some of our student athletes are feeling the amount of anxiety, which is only going to go up in the situation that we're in right now, right? But so Dr. Tim Elmore started Growing Leaders in order to bridge the gap between the generations. And so just a couple of things that you should know, like, this is a generation of first. So I want you to just think about, like, most of you are dealing with Generation Z. We're on the start of the Generation Z students. They were born around 2001. And usually there's not a hard, fast date. No matter what anybody says, there's not really a hard, fast date for generational breaks, but there's usually a big marker. For instance, right now, there's a marker happening. So there's going to be a generational break. The students, the kids that are born right around this right now, and it's usually a year or two, give or take, but this is going to be a marker that creates a new generation. But the generation you're dealing with now, they were born around 2001, and obviously the big marker there was 9/11. Okay, so and with not just 9/11 being the big marker there, but like technology has advanced in such a way that that's all they've ever known. So there's a couple of firsts that I think I should tell you about. And Tom, stop me at any time if you want to jump in. Or
this has rolled into where I wanted to go next, which was obviously what the research is saying about this generation. So no, that's perfect, Tree. Keep going.
All right, perfect. So this is a generation of first, and I want you to think about it this way. The first note that I will say is that they don't need adults to get information. And that's a huge one for coaches, because a lot of times we feel like we're giving them all this revolutionary information, and they can just go to YouTube and find any drill that you can come up with. I promise you they can find it. Any information you want to data download or dump into them, they can get that on their own. So, but here's the important part of that. While they don't need us for information, they desperately need us for context. They need us for interpretation. So the problem, if they can get information at their disposal, oftentimes they get it before they're emotionally ready to receive it. So they get it way too early. And very importantly, they get it without the context. So they think they have all the information they need. They think they know all these things, but they're only getting them in small little pieces. They need us to help them understand that, hey, that's information. It's great. Here's how it fits into the big picture. can we provide them the context that they need, because they don't have it. Another thing, that this is the first generation, they have the ability to broadcast their every thought and emotion. That annoys a lot of us, probably, at least it does me sometimes. But if you just change your paradigm and think about it a little differently, if they can broadcast their every thought and emotion, guess what else they have to do? They have to not broadcast their every thought and emotion. So that takes a little bit of willpower. It takes a lot of self-control, and it's anxiety producing, right? So that's a big one. They enjoy external stimuli at their fingertips 24/7. I mean, not right now because we're not really doing this, but if you go around, and even us, even as adults, like if we're waiting in line at the grocery store, what are we doing? Are we looking around? No, we look at everybody and they're checking their email.
Right.
You know, God forbid we look around and we make eye contact with a stranger, or we ask somebody how their day's doing. Those little moments of connection and boredom are gone. This is a really big one, this next one, and it's one that I think, especially right now, is very important to understand. This generation is in social contact at all times, including right now, yet often it's happening in isolation. So they're connecting through screens, essentially. And I'll tell you, the numbers on the millennial generation were pretty high in terms of how lonely they were. The numbers around Generation Z and their loneliness level are even higher. And here's the thing, they don't want to be lonely. They just don't have they don't have the skills built up to do anything about it. So they would love to be able to connect with their peers a little bit deeper. They just don't know how, because they don't have the reps. So that loneliness is really important. Go ahead, Tom.
And Tree, I think on one of the slides that you presented at the convention on that point, and please correct me because I may get this wrong, but you referenced that the level of anxiety that they have as a result of that was similar to psychiatric patients in the 50s, or was there something like that? Because
we're coming right up on it. You're exactly right. Yep.
Yeah.
And I can just jump ahead. They do endure the same level of anxiety as a psychiatric patient of the 1950s. And some of that is like, you know, some of it's tied to the loneliness that I was just talking about, but some of that is locus of control. When we do so much for them and plan so much for their lives, they tend to start to have this external locus of control, meaning they don't necessarily feel like they're in control of where their life goes. I can't tell you how many high school athletes I know somebody personally right now who just literally said the words to me, I don't have a choice, I have to play soccer. Why? Well, because my dad. Well, so just don't play. What would happen if you didn't play? Now, I don't know about you, but as a coach, I don't want that kid on my team. Right. I don't care how good this kid is at soccer. I don't want her on my team. But just her overall anxiety level is pretty high. She doesn't feel like she controls any component of her life. So any little sliver of control that she does have, she's going to take it. So we have to start to build in some internal locus of control. That's part of the anxiety producing. The other part is, I mean, just look at all the data being inundated into them. So 10,000 data bits a day they're seeing. And when the news is this scary, that anxiety level is even going to raise higher because they're connected. They're seeing all of this stuff that's going on in a way that maybe we wouldn't have necessarily seen. We could have shut our TV off. You can't shut your phone off. You can't, they're not, a lot of kids, by the way, there's some numbers that are pointing to this generation is starting to leave social media on purpose. They're starting to purposefully take breaks, not in huge mass, not the majority yet, but they're starting to clue into the fact that that you can't escape it as easily as you once did.
Right. No, I think, Tree, again, even rehearing you say it, it brings around kind of that penny drop and wow moment when you hear some of the statistics that you've just referenced. And I think that kind of where I want to go, and I don't know if Mark will have a question, where I want to go next, and Willow, jump in before I get there, but where I want to go next is the practical recommendations that you might have for coaches to try wherever possible to offset this. Because the reality, you know, you mentioned thinking partners, right? You mentioned you have one, and those conversations, I've had a number of conversations with my peers And it's almost impossible to put ourselves in their shoes because we don't know, we have no capacity to truly empathize with what it is that they're going through. And I think hearing it is one thing, understanding it and then acting upon it is another, because I think every coach, every teacher, every educator, has felt that frustration, but without hearing the insight that you just shared to kind of provide a frame of reference for it, I think it's incredibly difficult. So
Can I just good segue into a question. I mean, I have a 19-year-old daughter, and I have a newborn baby boy. So I'm at opposite ends of the spectrum as a dad. And the point you made about all of this data just being fed in, it's almost going in subconsciously as well. We talked about cognitive load theory yesterday in a child's ability to only work on one or two or maybe three things at best at a time in a practice, and they'll maybe only retain one of those three things in the working memory. But over time, it's the long-term memory that builds up this understanding of certain concept schemas, ideas that you access. So when we're fighting against the tide of this constant stream of subconscious information going in, yeah, I'm really curious to hear what. I'm sure there's not three things, I'm sure there's 100 things that you actually can do or have to do, but we've got to start somewhere. What would you advise everybody on this call today to start at least baby steps in trying to understand and put things in place to help this?
Sure. Yeah, I think that's a really great question and the perfect direction to go. I think before I get into, and I'll give you a pretty memorable like checklist, at least to get people started to try to address this and try to, I think what's important to understand about that data, the overload of information, is to understand that their filters, this is why it's harder sometimes to communicate, their filters have risen to the challenge, if you will. So because of all of those things, and because of they're just inundated with all this information, some of it's seeping through, you're exactly right, it's subconscious, but their filters have also gotten really, really developed, right? So some of the things that I'm going to give you before we're done with this call is just some ways to sort of bust through the filters so that they're hearing the right things and they're able to block out the things that don't necessarily serve them as people. And then you can bust in to get into the soccer stuff. Yeah, Tom.
Is this your scene? Is this your scene?
Yeah, that's what I wanted to go to next.
Yeah, perfect.
Yep.
Go there.
So before I get into the final, like, this is what you should do, this is what I was going to say next, is I think we do still want to continue to shift the paradigm. So that's a generation of first, but this is a slide in this, Dr. Elmore talks about in every one of his books. It's something he came up with a long time ago. And I think the first step to helping this generation when you're coaching them is to, all of you on the call, anybody who's coaching, I think the most important thing you can do is start to shift your paradigm. Yeah, it might not have to, like, it's kind of a bummer that you have to do so much to bust through your filters. It's kind of a bummer that we're having to possibly teach timeless values where maybe we didn't used to. That's a bummer, cool. But at the end of the day, we're about growing student athletes, right? We're about, trying to make them better so that we can be successful in the field, but also because we're a product of something bigger than ourselves, and we're trying to make a better world, right? Through one student athlete at a time. And so you could be mad about it, or you could just shift your paradigm and start to understand them a little bit more. So what I want to do before I get into here's some practical things you can do, I think we have to shift our paradigm and understand the world that we're all living with. So this is our scene. This is like what's around us all. Here's the difference. It's probably true for all of us. We're all living in this world that I'm about to describe to you. The difference with your student athletes now is that's the only world they've ever known. So there's a lot of unintentional messaging that they've received throughout the course of their lives that we just understanding it is step one. So the first part of scene is speed. Our world is completely full of speed. Everything is super fast. I mean, there's not one drive-through at McDonald's, there's two. And on top of that, there's an app you can get, and you can pull up to a little parking spot and they'll bring you your food to your car. Like, everything is constantly faster. If you can't, it happens to me too. Like, I don't have great internet at my house. I just don't have the capabilities. I sort of live in the middle of nowhere. And You know, if Netflix isn't loading fast enough, I have to grab my phone to, you know, play a game sometimes. Like, what? Are we crazy? So speed, if everything that they've ever known is fast, you can see how the message that they're getting all the time makes them maybe assume that slow is bad. Convenience. Convenience is the C in seen. If you think about it, like right now, this is awesome. Like, conveniences that we get are great. I can have this conversation from the Panera parking lot in my car. It's really useful. I can do banking by taking a picture of a check and depositing it. A lot of the conveniences are really useful, but as things can get easier and easier, more conveniences become available to us, you can see how the message that is being sent is that hard is bad. Excuse me. Entertainment. So we're entertained 100% of the time, right? I just mentioned the Meijer thing. Like, if you're in line at Walmart, or we have Meijer in Michigan or whatever, like, you're not looking around and making contact with a stranger. You're checking your email, right? So if we're constantly entertaining them, can you see how they might think that boring is bad? So, I mean, if you ask one of your student athletes, like, when's the last time you were bored? You know, except for in the middle of your practice. That's a joke. A lot of them, they don't have margin. They don't have boring in their lives. And so, and the problem, listen, I didn't like to be bored as a student athlete either. But the thing that is true now is we know more about our brains. And we know that in the margin of boring, that's when innovation happens. That's when empathy happens. That's when creativity happens. We need boring. Our brains need margin. So the message that they're getting is that it's bad. So if they're bored, they go find something to do rather than just be bored. That's why meditation and mindfulness has taken a huge increase, because our brains actually need that. So nurture. Not every one of your student athletes is over nurtured for sure, but you have to admit, like, we're just short of putting helmets on them at the dinner table and high-fiving them for putting a spoon in the dishwasher the right way, right? So, like, if we're having all of their hard conversations for them, can you see how they might get the message that risk is bad? And as sport coaches, we're trying to get them to take some pretty healthy risks as they're playing, right? And they've gotten the message their entire lives that risk is bad. That's a problem. And then the last one I've seen is entitlement. If everybody gets a trophy, why in the world would I work hard? So the message that they get when everybody gets something, like when you get a ribbon for showing up, is that labor, sticking with it and sticking into with laborious things, that's bad. So if you think about just the right-hand side of that, so the assumptions they make, that slow, hard, boring, risk, and labor is bad. If you just think of those things and you ask yourself how you grew, if you even just go back to the beginning of this call when I talked about the people who affected me in my life, they made my life really hard. The things that are being sucked away from society and they haven't really, the messaging that they've gotten as being bad for their whole lives, those are the things that make us great. Those are the things that give us the experience and the resilience to be able to get back up when we get knocked down. And they have always been sent a message that those things are bad. So we have to just understand that. And then when I'm working with student athletes, the first thing I do is I share the slide and I just say, hey, y'all, there's no magic pill, but if we can change our language and how we see slow, hard, boring, risk, and labor and see those as good things rather than bad things, well, that's going to be step number one to creating the kind of culture around resilience and growth and being uncomfortable that we could possibly have. So I think that's the first step in kind of generating a different idea and a different understanding about this generation.
I love all that.
Before I go on, yeah,
I'm going to be a little controversial on the first point, and it's to do with academic environments. I read a great book called The End of Average. Fantastic book, and it discussed, and you quite rightly said that the slow is perceived as bad. Now, this book touches on school systems that promote speed as a measure of intelligence, yet it's based on the learning method. The same two people may have two different learning methods, but the academic system asks you to learn very fast and then get this out into a test on a paper in 2 hours. it's no, and the book argues, it's no sign of intelligence. It just means whatever learning method's been put in place for that particular class and those students is helping the ones that, you know, obviously pass the test and are able to put that information down in 2 or 3 hours. So this illusion of, or this message of slow is bad is actually perpetuated in other, for me, in other areas of society and life, and especially in an academic environment. I think that's dangerous.
I think sport is actually, I think that's a phenomenal point. And like Carol Dweck gets into this a little bit in growth mindset, and it's in other places, but I think sport, like as coaches and as like the athletic industry, I feel like we probably are the worst perpetuators of that idea, and that the natural, for some reason, we think the natural athlete is the better athlete. And I'll tell you, the depth to someone's goodness, the depth of somebody's talent comes from those that have to work really, really hard. It's why, I'll tell you honestly, just like personally, like from an anecdotal like experience type of thing, I coach volleyball, I played softball. Softball came very easily to me. Volleyball, it didn't. I was terrible. And so I had to learn every single different way that you had to, you know, do this and this and this. It's why sometimes naturals aren't the best coaches, because they learned it too quickly. So I think that sport perpetuates that, just kind of where you're going. And I think our education system needed to be redesigned about 100 years ago. So I think you're absolutely right. But yeah, I think that permeates other places. But I think as coaches, you know, you see a 10-year-old dribbling a ball down the field, and that kid is like a rock star. You're like, oh, you just automatically think like in 8 years, that kid's going to be amazing, because they're already so good at that. It's not necessarily the truth. And the problem is those kids usually end up with a fixed mindset if we're not careful.
I agree with that.
Yeah. Tree, fantastic points. And I want to shift it back to the coaching piece on, I think many of us, I'm certainly guilty of perhaps not being as societally aware as I need to be about the challenges that the kids that we work with face on a daily basis, right? Because we lament the fact that they're not resilient enough, that you know, that they don't take risks, that they can't dig in, that they lack courage sometimes, that they're risk averse. Like it's a problem, but it's now, as we shift into kind of practical applications, I want to bring up a phrase for the coaches called deliberate roadblocks. And it's the concept of trying to place challenges very specifically, very intentionally within your practice design that might facilitate just those development of those complex competencies being seen. So sometimes ignore the technical, ignore the tactical, and just say, today I want to focus on grit, resilience. I want to focus on leadership. I want to focus on courage, like, and find a way to manipulate your practice design to intentionally force those feelings to be witnessed. So I think, Tree, if you can talk a little more now about from a team formation, a team culture perspective, some of the advice, you know, even if it's as simple as take phones away at a team dinner, right, and force them to interact for an hour. But if you could give us a couple of tangibles, and then I would, again, I'd just encourage everybody more from a practical perspective on field, kind of read around the concept of deliberate roadblocks.
Yeah, for sure. I think, first of all, that's a great point. And if you haven't read Daniel Coyle, Talent Code and Culture Code, but Talent Code specifically talks about teachers in Japan. There's a study of teachers in Japan, and I think it was math classes, versus teachers in the United States, and how much longer the teachers in Japan would let their students struggle. In fact, sometimes giving them the wrong answer and just like seeing what was going to happen. It's a pretty intense study, and it's worth a read. And it's something that I thought about constantly. And anytime I'm with teams, I'll, like, if I'm working with a team in a workshop, I absolutely will do that just in our team sessions, because whether you're on the field or off the field, I think that you have to drip in this resilience training every single time. So, but let me get into just a few points. The bottom line with Generation Z specifically, I think it's important to remember these few things. I think, Tom, you alluded to something that I want to make perfectly clear. This generation feels really, really judged, okay? Not necessarily by us, but it may be misplaced to us. I think we do some judging. I think that it's important, and that's why I spend so much of my time trying to shift your paradigm, because if they're not resilient or they're risk averse, that's our fault. Like, it's the messaging that even if their parents are doing everything perfectly, by the way, and I'll tell this to parents, I encourage you to share this information with parents for sure, because we do parent different right now, but like, even if parents are doing everything perfectly, these messages are being dripped into their lives all the time. So parent can be perfect, they're still going to get that slow is bad. Okay. So I think that's important to know. And it's important to understand that they're judging themselves because they're looking through screens. Remember how they're connecting is through screens. So they feel judged, fairly or unfairly, our fault or not, doesn't matter. They feel judged. Please don't add to that. Okay. Some other bottom line issues is that trust must be earned. I say this often. It used to be like, when I played, I would go in and I would trust my coach until my coach gave me ample reason not to trust them. Okay. It's the opposite, and it's not your fault. When players come to you, oftentimes they will not trust you until you give them daily, consistent reasons. And every day you got to keep earning your pocket change. Until you give them daily reasons to trust you, they don't. And so it's a little bit reverse, and you can't take that personally. And I think that a lot of coaches take that personally. And they don't care if you won 1,000 games. It doesn't matter. Like, you have to earn their trust from an individual point of view. And you have to do it with your actions. You have to walk your talk. And I think those things are timeless. I just think it's even harder now because of media, because of things like Jerry Sandusky and Nasser. Like, we have people who have betrayed the trust and they know about it. So there's a big difference there. Relationship must be established. That is not new. John Wooden was really great at establishing relationships. The difference is that they're less skilled at doing it. So you have to help them learn how to create an established relationship with you. Incentive must be cultivated. If you think about it, a lot of how they've been raised has been through incentive, whether it be on their games or on Snapchat getting badges or their parents giving them money for grades. They're sort of used to getting incentive. Can you find creative ways to build incentive? And it doesn't have to be tangible, but can you build incentive into rewarding the types of resilient, risk-taking behavior, healthy risk-taking behavior that you want? And then finally, hope absolutely must be offered, especially right now. Like, in the world that we're in right now, this is a very, very scary time, and they're inundated with it. Can you be a source of hope for them? So I know we don't have a lot of time, but I really just want to give you this final kind of timeline. And this is how we look at it, is we actually use a Habitude to talk about what as a coach you can do to better connect. And I'll put it this way. If you think about a bottle of water, right? Like, just a typical, you go to, whatever, you get a bottle of Dasani water from the store. In that bottle, there's a timeless thing and there's a timely thing, okay? The thing that's been around forever is water. But in ancient Egypt, they didn't drink it out of that water bottle with the blue top and the plastic. They didn't drink it out of that. They drank it out of a dirty, muddy cup. But if I went to work with your team and I had, on one hand, I had this, brand new shiny Yeti full of water, and in the other hand, I had a dirty, muddy cup from ancient Egypt, which one would they want to drink out of? They drink out of the Yeti all day, right? Basically, what we're at Growing Leaders, what we're encouraging people to do, coaches, teachers, educators, leaders, to do is, can you update the water bottle? Can you just take the timeless things like honesty and hard work and resilience and taking risks? Can you take all of those things and just update the water bottle? Just put it in something where they want to drink it. Instead of saying you have to, can you make it their want to? And this is how. So this is the final, here's the water bottle. And I'm going to just as really quickly, I'm happy to answer any questions. Tom has my email address, and anybody can reach out to me. But we like to think of them as an epic generation. So if you do nothing else, as you're updating the water bottle, think of doing it this way. Can you make things E in EPIC is experiential. Can you just make things a little bit more experiential instead of talking to them for 25 minutes about what this drill is going to look like? Can you make it a little bit more experiential? Instead of having an hour-long meeting to start your season, can you make it shorter and make it more where they're having their hands on and they're a part of it? It's experience. If you think about how they've been raised, they're used to kind of a guide on the side, right? Instead of a sage on the stage. And then the P in EPIC is participatory. Can you give them a say? This generation, more than any other, A, is used to having a say, but they long to be a part of that which they help create. Can you help them? Can you bring them in and let them help you create what it's going to look like in your team culture? The I is, can you wrap it around images? Mark, you talked about schema earlier, and I'll tell you what, as humans, we all think in schema, okay? So images in metaphor and stories, that is absolutely going to reach them in both hemispheres of the brain, and it's going to elicit emotion. It's going to elicit a response faster than almost anything else. So can you wrap your season in a theme? Can you, even think back to like Coach Carter. Can you name your plays after people and make them funny? Like, can you bring metaphor into what you're doing as a coach? They will respond to that a heck of a lot better. We have, like at Growing Leaders, we have a whole thing called Habitude, like I had mentioned earlier. Again, happy to share it with anybody who wants more information on it, but that is all about trying to teach things like honesty in a way that they want to drink the water. And then finally, the C in EPIC is connected. Can you help them connect? Remember, the loneliest generation of all time. So if nothing else, this is one thing I tell coaches to do all the time. Like, if I'm going to do a drill or whatever, I want them to process information because their metacognition, thinking about thinking, is kind of low right now because we just go right to our phones, right? So I might ask them an open-ended question about a drill or about a team issue and have them break off into a group of 3 for 30 seconds. Hey, you guys talk about this, and here's the question, and then we're going to share out. Just doing that a little bit every single day, it's kind of reading, right? So when you read a lot, you increase your vocab without even realizing it. That's what having your players connect in small groups on a daily basis is kind of a head fake. And it kind of helps them feel a little bit less lonely and a little bit more connected because their connections are 15 miles wide and a centimeter deep. They know it, they feel it, they want to do something about it, but they need your help. So that's EPIC. If I had to say anything, that would be kind of where I would say, like, hey, here's just update the water bottle, coach, and here it is. Be a little bit more epic.
Tree, that's incredible, and thank you ever so much for that insight and those ideas. To everybody that's listening, Tree does have to run. We will make sure that we share. Obviously on Twitter, you can follow Tree. You can see her work. We can get you if you want it. I can share with you email addresses, and obviously we'll put a link out there to Growing Leaders as well. So Tree, on behalf of everybody at Beyond Pulse and myself and Mark and everybody listening, thank you so much for being flexible and willing enough to sit in a Panera car park, have this conversation. I'm delighted that it did take us 4 times, and that there's people online and around the world that were able to listen to this, because your insight is wonderful. So thank you for sharing the time with us today.
Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate you having me.
Yeah,
thanks,
brilliant.
everybody. Guys, just for those that are still with us, we go again this afternoon with John O'Sullivan at 1 p.m. Eastern time, 5 p.m. UK time, 10 a.m. Pacific Coast time or Pacific Standard Time. So if you're around, we'd obviously love to see you there as well. So thank you everybody for joining, and yeah, hope to hear from you soon.